The U.S. State Department has said that it will impose visa restrictions on Israeli settlers involved in undermining peace, security, or stability in the occupied West Bank. Secretary of State Antony Blinken announced the move on Tuesday. That's one day after the State Department said that Israel has not taken sufficient steps to address settler attacks that have driven many Palestinians off their land. President Joe Biden has warned repeatedly that Israel must act to stop violence by Israeli settlers against Palestinians in the West Bank, which has increased since the October 7th Hamas attack on Israel.
Violence in the West Bank this year is at levels not seen since the Second Intifada. And in recent weeks, an alarming surge in violent acts has driven this unwelcome record even higher. This includes unprecedented levels of violence by Israeli extremist settlers targeting Palestinians and their property, displacing entire communities, as well as violence by Palestinian extremist militants against Israeli civilians. Today, as President Biden recently warned, the United States is taking action to address this escalating violence in the West Bank by implementing a new visa restriction policy under Section 212A3C of the Immigration and Nationality Act.
Now, for the very latest on the war in Gaza, let's cross live to Tel Aviv and speak with our ICE correspondent, Karl Bostic. Karl, great to see you. Thank you for joining us on Newsday. Now, how do you explain this level of fighting only days after a week-long ceasefire?
You know, with the fighting that we've seen just in the past 48 hours, you wouldn't even know there had been a week-long ceasefire. But this speaks to what's at stake, the urgency that's now confronting Israel. You heard that protester speaking about this circle of revenge. Well, now that circle of revenge is much higher and much more intense. One way of looking at it is that with this fighting now going to the heart of Khan Yunis, Hamas is claiming to have killed 10 Israeli soldiers, destroyed 24 Israeli armored vehicles and tanks, snipers having shot at or injured 6 Israelis, and also injuring more with anti-personnel mines. Because of the frequency of those postings, online postings by Hamas, which Israel has not commented on, that suggests just how intense it is. And one reason why it is so intense, in fact, it's been called the deadliest fighting since the war began, is because to avoid international criticism of the kind of devastation and destruction that we saw before the ceasefire in northern Gaza, this is really more of a counterterrorism operation where it's house to house to house fighting. I mean, you heard that comment by that Israeli officer. In fact, they're saying that the method of MO is that, you've got Hamas fighters. They're going into residential buildings in civilian clothes, but each residential building is also a storage place for weapons. And once they reach those buildings, that's when they then start firing at Israelis. So that's what's going on there. But the urgency speaks to the fact that the overarching goal of Israel in this war is to eradicate and destroy Hamas. And what that means is this. This means not only killing the Hamas fighters, but destroying the command and control apparatus. By that, we're talking about the leaders, Yahya Sinwar and Mohammed Deif. Those are the 2 leaders of Hamas. And where are they? Khan Yunis. Khan Yunis, in fact, is their hometown. And they're believed to be, hiding in this vast network of tunnels, about 300 miles of tunnels that go throughout Gaza. So this is a fight above ground and underground. And then the larger question is this. After 8 weeks of fighting, Hamas is still intact. The estimates are that Hamas fighters number between 25 to 40,000. Israel estimates maybe 5,000 have been killed. When you speak about the tunnels, Israel has discovered about 800 tunnel shafts. They destroyed about 500. Then when it comes to rockets, Israel estimates they have about 30,000 rockets. 11,000 have been fired since the war began. And yet, something, after 8 weeks of war, you're still getting rockets fired into Israel. Not on a regular basis. It used to be 3 times a day on a daily basis into Israel. Yesterday afternoon here in Tel Aviv, there were sirens for rockets, and we all had to go to the shelter because rockets were exploding over Tel Aviv. So in other words, they're still intact. And the diplomatic clock is such that Israel is being told by the U.S. that you only have weeks to carry out a war with this level of intensity, meaning now it's being suggested that the war at this intensity could only play out until the end of January, before all international support almost, quite frankly, just evaporates, and it make Israel even more isolated internationally as this humanitarian crisis just goes into yet another hellish dimension.
Right. Now, Karl, let's turn our attention to the hostages. Can you give more details about Prime Minister Netanyahu's meeting with families of the hostages?
You could say it's a defining point so far of the war for Prime Minister Netanyahu and his relationship with the hostage issue, because up until now, the war is being posed as something with two main objectives, destroying, eradicating Hamas and bringing the hostages home, as though those were twin goals that were compatible, that could reinforce each other. And that meeting yesterday, that basically was a stark defining point where basically he was saying one of two things. He was telling the families of the hostages still there. There are still 137 Israelis in captivity, being kept mostly in tunnels of Gaza, telling them that, we can't guarantee we're going to bring them all home, number one. But also perhaps more alarmingly, basically saying that our priority is to destroy Hamas, meaning that we're going to go full bore on this. And that bringing all the hostages home right now is not the first priority. And in part because Hamas has upped the ante. They've raised the price so high, demanding the release of all prisoners in Israeli jails, about 6,000 Palestinian prisoners at least in Israeli jails, to which the hostage families are saying, what price is too high to bring all the hostages home, especially when you still have about 15, 20 women and children. You've got elderly people there not getting medication, people who would die in captivity because of that. And it was a meeting even made more charged emotionally because you also had newly released hostages from the ceasefire at that meeting, explaining the terrible conditions and also talking about the kinds of abuse and sexual abuse that the female prisoners may be encountering. In fact, one of the exchanges was very personal that Prime Minister Netanyahu was saying, they said, we gave you an ID decal to wear around your neck. Where's that decal? And Prime Minister Netanyahu's answer was, I'm wearing it in my heart. It's in my heart. And to which they all answered, shame on you, shame on you. So there's a lot of disgust and acrimony against the prime minister right now. This could really affect his political future. Latest polls now showing his approval at about 27% across the country, down from 57%, and trust in him as a leader is now down to 4%.
4% is really on the low side now. But there's also a lot of attention focused on Gaza after the war, the day after. How is this so controversial?
Controversial because that really kind of affects the way in which Israel is going to fight this war. Up until now, Israel has fought Hamas at least 5 or 6 times in terms of, exchanging fire, since Hamas took power in 2007. But this one is different, as I mentioned, indicated the other day. This effort is not about just keeping Hamas under control. In other words, as they used to call it in a very cynical, dehumanizing way, mowing the lawn. This time they want to remove the infrastructure of Hamas. And to do that also involves what will the new reality be after the war is over. Israel is now kind of drawing a red line. The U.S. says that Israel must not have a presence in Gaza after the war, to which Prime Minister Netanyahu said the other day, we will demilitarize Gaza, and in order to do that, Israel has to remain in Gaza and also create a buffer zone. Many countries, especially Arab countries, are saying you cannot reduce the size of Gaza territory. It's only 25 miles long to begin with. That's a quarter of the size of Abuja. And at the same time, Israel is against a UN peacekeeping force because it doesn't trust the UN. And then an idea of a multinational force made up of mostly moderate Arab countries such as Jordan or Egypt or even Qatar is being met with a pushback from the Arab countries because they're saying that we don't want to create a situation where we see Arab troops fighting on Arab people, meaning Palestinian people in Gaza. So this puts Israel into a real corner. And for now, Israel is saying that, we have to deal with reality like no one else. And after the war, it's going to be an Israeli presence on the ground for some time to come with a buffer zone. And this goes against the U.S.'s own wishes as well. So there's a lot of at stake in the weeks to come.
Right, Karl Bostic, Arise special correspondent, thank you so much for your contribution. As always, live from Tel Aviv. I know you did make mention to rockets flying above yesterday. Please do stay safe.